For families with neurodivergent children, getting a diagnosis is often the first step, but it's also one of the most confusing. Many parents start with the school only to find out those assessments don't count as a medical diagnosis. And without that diagnosis, many services and support systems won't even begin. In this clip from our financial planning workshop, we break down where to actually start, who to talk to, and how this early stage connects to accessing the resources your family may need over time.
It's how do we get started? A lot of times, I don't think any of this is taught in any prenatal classes that I've ever been. And one of the things is start by asking questions. And, just by thinking about, do your children seem different from other kids? But in work perspective, are we talking about executive functioning? Are we talking about social and academic? If you have questions, I would look into ways and places that can give you those assessments. And I think that's usually the hardest starting point. Because in order to receive services for a lot of public agencies, such as school districts or regional centers, you need to have a medical diagnosis. The assessment that they do, say, at the school district is not a medical assessment, right? It's an assessment that it's a lot of times it's very academic. The scope is really narrow. And so, for regional center, my child, when he was 2, our pediatrician noticed that he was very, very significantly delayed in speech. And so we got a referral to regional center. And at regional center, they give him, speech therapy. But then at the age of 3, if you don't have what they call qualifying diagnosis, you're out of regional center. And that
explain what a regional center is.
A regional center these are state agencies that are set up by the state of California, the Department of Human Services. And what the regional centers do is they are nonprofits that they basically help the state of California run a lot of services for children and adults with disabilities. And they have very specific criteria of who can become a part of that service and be a client. So if your children or anyone have a diagnosis that qualifies within the realm of services, they will help you to start coordinate to help you either pay for some of the services or help you find the services. A lot of times if your child is very young, they will give you maybe speech therapy services. They have vendors that they work with so that if your person requires speech therapy, maybe what they'll do is they'll find the vendor for you, you go, and they'll pay for it. So you don't need to use your insurance. They do their own assessment to see if, they qualify. So that's one of the very first things is if you suspect anything, go talk to your pediatrician. A lot of times your pediatrician can get the process started for you. They can refer you to specialists who can do the testing, do the evaluation. Because without a diagnosis, because when you request for these assessments, say by regional center, they can actually reject you. I really think that if you go in with an assessment, with a referral from a physician or from even the school district, and you show them, then they'll say, okay, we'll assess your child. Of course, if you ask for assessment and they reject it, you can appeal. But as all things, it's a process. So if you have a strong case, what usually that entails is already having a standing diagnosis. And I think that really helps you to be able to get through that process. So there are ways and places that help our kiddos get services. First is local school district. So if you notice, or if your teacher, if they start to notice something, right, then you can, and also because our kids are at school for 6-7 hours a day, right, that's where majority they spend their time. That becomes one of the first places if something were to have discovered is usually there, besides being at home, of course. Regional center, what we just talked about, qualifying diagnosis, so that's very important. I know that ADHD is not a qualifying diagnosis that the regional center will help you. But a lot of times, there's comorbidity, right? It's very rare that a neurotypical person just have one diagnosis. Usually it's like 2 or 3. So maybe the other one might qualify you. So that's why I said getting a medical diagnosis first through seeing different specialists is very important. And then, of course, there's the State Department of Human Services. If you have other physical disability too, right? They can provide in-home services, they can provide medical supplies to you or medical equipment. What makes it difficult to navigate is each of the services, they have very specific scope and they don't rarely overlap. So you got to figure out, okay, I got to ask this from this agency. I got to go now this for this other agency. And then, of course, there is family funding through self-pay and private insurance, which we did for many, many years because it took 3 different evaluations for my child to get a qualified diagnosis. And that took 10 years. So if you get one diagnosis and you're like, okay, but it doesn't seem like, then maybe wait a year to get a second opinion. I really think that is important because sometimes, your age, your developmental is really hard to tease out.
This video is part of a larger workshop that walks through the full planning process for families with neurodivergent children. In the next videos, we'll go deeper into specific topics, like what changes before and after age 18, how public benefits and funding work, and how tools like ABLE accounts and special needs trusts fit into a long-term plan. We'll also talk about planning for employment, housing, healthcare, and how to support your child into adulthood. If you'd like to follow along as we go deeper into these topics, you can subscribe and stay connected with our upcoming videos. And as always, this content is for educational purposes only.